In the previous part, we talked about credentials for healthcare providers, and those credentials involve both credentials for institutions and credentials for individuals, and we discussed several examples for both. In this part, we will talk about rules and regulations regarding these credentials. And as we know, in United States, each state has its own set of administrative uh, rules and regulations to carry out their provision, law regulatory nursing. And these rules are considered as administrative laws. Now, the rules and regulation must be within the scope outlined by the legislation that was passed. And both the Nurse Act, Practice Act, and the state rules and regulations govern the nursing in every state. Uh, as we know that the purpose of regulating the practice of nursing is twofold. First, regulation protect the public and make the individual practitioners accountable for their actions. And in order to make it sure that those individuals, I mean nurses, they apply and they comply with rules and regulations, there was what we call a scope of a practice. And the scope of a practice, uh, this means that nursing is a scientific process that founded on a professional body of knowledge, and it is learned a profession based on understanding of the human condition across the lifespan. And the relationship of the client with others and within the environment is an dedicated to caring for others. Now, the practice of nursing means assisting clients to attain and maintain his optimal health and to implement also the strategy of care to accomplish the required or defined goals within the context of the client-centered care and etc. It also evaluates the responses to nursing care and the treatment. Now, when we talk about the scope of practice or nursing scope of practice, I will give you an example. For example, if you want to know whether this skill or task is within the scope of practice for nurse or not. So, if the skill or the tasks permitted or not. So, if it is not permitted, this means that this skill or task is not within the scope of practice for the nurse. Now, if the skill or the task is permitted, so we ask this question: was this skill or task taught in your basic nursing program? So if the answer is no, this means that it is not within his scope of practice. But if the answer is yes, we have to ask another question: has this task or skill become routine in nursing literature and in practice? If the answer is no, this means that this skill also is not within the scope of practice. But if the answer is yes, we have to ask another question: does carrying out the skill or the task pass the reasonable and prudent standard for nursing? So, if the answer is no, this means that it is not within the scope of practice for the nurse. But if the answer is yes, we have to ask another question: is this task or this skill listed in your hiring agency policy and procedure manual? So, if the answer is yes, this means that this skill and this practice, this task is within the scope of practice for a nurse. When we talk about sunset laws and the Nurse Practice Act, we know that law remains in the effect until it's replaced. And because this has resulted in archaic law remaining in the effect for many years, some states have passed what are known as the sunset laws. So, sunset laws provide that any regulatory act, such as a Nurse Practice Act, will automatically be rescinded after the predetermined length of time, if not reauthorized. So it needs to be reauthorized again in order to consider it as continuing. And nurse must also identify when the sunsetting and this will occur, and work in advance in order to sustain the current law or make any further changes in the future. So this is what we mean by Sunset Law and the Nurse Practice Act. Now, the advanced practice the registered nurses. Now, those include the nurse practitioners, the nurse anesthetists, nurse midwives, and in some states, it might include the clinical nurse specialists. The licensure requirement for the advanced practice vary from one state to another. Most, but not all, require the master's or doctoral degree in nursing, and gradually states are moving toward the master's degree as a minimal standard for the advanced practice nurses. Now, the advanced practice nurses have the skills and abilities in order to meet the needs of the millions of individuals, including patients, expected to enter the system throughout the healthcare reform process. Now, the state regulations that do not allow the advanced practice nurses to practice within the full scope of their abilities create a barrier to their being able to make this contribution. So it is very important for the advanced practice nurse to have these skills and these abilities in order to help individuals in meeting their needs and also maintaining their health within the goals that they are looking for. We know that the State Board of Nursing, as we mentioned before, it's govern the nurses' laws, and the State Board of Nursing also accredited the nursing educational program, as we mentioned in previous slide. So, what are other functions for the State Board of Nursing? Let us first identify the State Board of Nursing is the administrative department of the government legally empowered to carry out the provision of the Nurse Practice Act. Now, what are the functions of the State Board of Nursing? First, to establish standards for the licensure, then to examine the licenses applicants, and to provide for interstate endorsement also, renew licenses, grant temporary licenses, and provide for inactive status for those already licensed to request it, and enforces disciplinary codes, provide rules for revocation of license, and regulates specialty practice, and it establishes standards and curricula for nursing program, and last to approve nursing education programs. So all those are considered as a function of the State Board of Nursing. Now, if you want to obtain a nursing license in the United States, there are two procedures for obtaining the nursing license. The first one is the licensure by examination, which is the we talked about previously, the NCLEX RN or the NCLEX PN. It depends on the degree that you are holding. So through the NCLEX RN is the examination that you can get the licensure. The second is for obtaining the license when the nurse is already licensed in another jurisdictions and is called a licensure by endorsement. So you can you can transfer your licensure from one state to another, and since we call it the licensure by endorsement, you endorse your licensure to another state. When you seek for licensure by endorsement, the applicant is not required to take the examination again another time, and the licensing examination results from the initial state are accepted as a proof for minimum safe practice in the other state that you are going to transfer to. But other requirements also must be met also in order to continue the process for the endorsement. Now, what are the ways of obtaining licensure in nursing? In nursing, there are three ways, as we said, exist for a nurse to get a license to practice. The first one, as we mentioned, license by examination, and in this, the nurse or the new nurse or new graduate sits for and passes a standardized exam such as the NCLEX in US and prometric exam in other countries. Like here in Oman, we have what we call the prometric exam. So you have to sit as a new graduate and take this standardized exam, and you have to pass the examination in order to be licensed with as a registered nurse. Now, the other form also we discussed before is the license by endorsement. And here, an existing nurse with an RN license from one state is allowed to obtain a licensure from another state without having to go through the examination process again for another time. So you endorse your license to another state. And the third way is by licensure by mutual recognition. And here the states or countries recognize each other's degree as a professional licensure. So there is a cross-border practice. So no need to have any examination. If I, for example, agreed or I recognize this educational program, so no need for this for a newcomer or for a new graduate of nurse from this country to sit for examination, for example, if he come to my country. So this is what we call mutual recognition or licensure by mutual recognition. Now we'll give you example for a licensed practical nurse and RN by endorsement in Florida. So either the applicant are eligible for the licensure by the endorsement when they hold a valid license to practice a professional or a practical nursing in another state or territory of the United States, or the applicant also could be eligible or can be candidate for the licensure by endorsement when they have successfully completed the state board test pool examination or the NCLEX examination. Or also applicants are also eligible for licensure by endorsement when they have actively practiced nursing in another state or jurisdictions or territory of the United States for two or for more than 2 or 3 preceding years without any criminal history or having his or her license acted against by the licensing authority or any jurisdiction. So those are 3 ways of endorsement for licensed practical nurse or registered nurse in Florida. Now, what about licensure by examination? And again, we mentioned this examination, which is the NCLEX examination, NCLEX RN or NCLEX PN. When each state adopted a licensing law, it's also established a mechanism for examining licensed applicants. Now, the establishment of licensing examination was an important part for early effort to achieve professional standards for the registered nurses. And the current examination for the NCLEX RN for registered nurses and the NCLEX PN for practical nursing. It is basically it's used in all the states and territories of the United States. Now, this examination it is a computerized adaptive testing, and all NCLEX are now administered through this computerized adaptive testing. We call it the CAT. And the CAT consists of a bank of examination questions that are administered through a computerized system. Now, on the NCLEX RN, the minimum number of questions that might be administered is 75, and the maximum is 265 questions. The maximum length of time for the examination is 5 hours, and the candidate can perform either especially well or very poor, and he might complete the exam in just 1 hour. It depends on his level and on his competency in answering the questions and so on. For me, I sat for this exam before, and thanks God that I got the NCLEX RN licensure 1 year ago. And for me, I finished the examination from the first 75 questions, and it took me only 2 hours to finish this examination with a passing score, of course. So this is regarding the NCLEX examination or NCLEX RN licensure. um, we talk about revocation or limitation of the license. Now, what do we mean by revocations or limitations of a license? A license to practice any occupation become a property right of the individual once the state has rewarded it. As long as the individual renews a license by paying the appropriate fees and meeting the requirements such as continuing education, license cannot be revoked without a cause. Now, there are actions taken to restrict or remove the license, and those actions termed as disciplinary actions. So, what are those actions that take that or restrict or remove the license? We have 10 reasons for disciplinary action against any nurse in order to consider his license expired, or we might restrict or remove his license. The first one is drug abuse, drug diversion for self, other drug related problems or issues, failure to maintain minimum standards, violating a board order, documentation errors, other unprofessional practices, failure to comply with requirements, medications errors, and felony, which is, for example, having a crime or whatever. So all those are actions, disciplinary actions that restrict or remove the license from nurse. Now, let us talk about licensure of graduate of foreign nursing schools. As we all know that there are many nurses from other countries have immigrated to the United States and sought licensure to be able to work and their new home or to work in the United States. Now, some nurses have come to the United States for additional education and need a license to engage in clinical practice associated with the education. So, in order to for foreign educated nurses to be able to work in the United States, there are two requirements that must be met in order for work in the United States. The first one is the visa that permits the employment and the work, and this visa either a visa granted for a permanent immigrant, or it might be the one that granted to a temporary worker. For example, those who will go for a period of time, short period of time, to work there in the United States. For example, through their study period, they want to practice nursing, so they need to have a visa either for a permanent immigrant or for a temporary worker. Now, the second requirement also for the foreign educated nurses, they also must obtain a state license to practice nursing, which is we talked about before. This is the NCLEX RN licensure. Now, in order to obtain a license, all graduates of foreign nursing schools who want to practice nursing, as we mentioned, in the United States, must provide a verification to the state licensing authority that their nursing education meets state requirements, and they must also, as we said, they have or they must take the appropriate NCLEX RN examination. Now, maybe some of you heard about this abbreviation, the CGFNS International, and this abbreviation is related to Commission on Graduate of Foreign Nursing Schools. Now, why this commission was established? In the US, the Department of Law and the Department of Human Services and the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the American Nurse Association, and the National League Nursing also all are considered about the safety of the public and about the well-being of the foreign educated nurses. In order to address all these problems, these organizations and government agencies collaborated in the development of the independent organization which is called the Commission on Graduate of Foreign Nursing Schools. Now, this basically the CGFNS a service visa screen and provide a certificate that enable an individual who want to work in US to apply for a visa. Now, the visa screen includes the following steps. The first is a review of the foreign nurses' education, then evaluate all the current and previous licenses to practice nursing, and assessment of the English language proficiency for the applicants also, because it's very important to know how to be competent in English language and to be proficient, and also a completion of either the CGF and AS assessment of general nursing knowledge examination or the NCLEX RN examination that we mentioned before. So all these things, all these steps should be fulfilled and should be completed in order to get the visa screen that will give you the permit to work in the United States. Uh, Now, certification in nursing. As we mentioned before, certification in nursing is primarily a professional but not legal credentials, and it focuses on knowledge and the skills that are related to a particular area of practice. Now, the definition of certification is it is a document. It is the documented validation of specific qualifications that is demonstrated by individual RN in the provision of their professional nursing care in a defined area of practice. Also, certification is valuable from many professional nursing and healthcare organizations. Now, the American Nurse Credentialing Center certification, which is the ANCC, uh, it is a method of recognizing nursing who have special expertise, and also the applicant must demonstrate current practice and knowledge beyond that required for the licensure as an RN. Now, if we looked at the master degree nowadays form the basis for the requirement for certification. For example, in some degrees, for example, in clinical nurse specialist or nurse practitioner or other advanced practice roles, also, but it is moving forward for the use of the doctor of nursing practice later on. For specialty certification, there are requirements for continuing education and hours of practice in the area of specialization. So this is in order if you want to have certificate in nursing, you need to comply with all these requirements in order to get this certificate. The future of credentialing in healthcare. It is important for nursing to have credentialing system that can be understood by other healthcare professionals. And the current changes are moving nursing closer to an effective credentialing systems. So how this can be fulfilled? The first and the most important thing is the institutional control of credentials, and uh, this happened when those institutions believe that the state should take positive action in order to protect the public and continue to exert pressure to license additional healthcare providers. Now, it is also another approach for credentialing the healthcare, and it is also certifying specific competences rather than certifying the entire field of practice. So this is the first thing. Now, the other thing is the pressure of the Institute of Medicine recommendations, which is the IOM, and which declared that there should be an interdisciplinary focus on building the common language of healthcare with the ultimate aim of creating a set of core competencies for all healthcare professionals. Now, this proposal would seem to run counter to effort in nursing in order to develop nursing specific language and to describe the work of nurses while they are doing their jobs. Now, another recommendation also by the IOM is to meet and to develop specific core competences that relate to the following things. The first is delivering patient-centered care and working as a part of interdisciplinary teams, practicing the evidence-based healthcare, focus on quality improvements, and using the information technology while they are doing their work or they practicing their profession. This is the end of this presentation. Thank you for your listening, and please, if you have any question, just send me. Or if you want to expand your information regarding any specific details, you can go and review chapter 3, as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation. Thank you again.